My name is Elena Brooks, and I used to believe the scariest thing a mother-in-law could do was insult your cooking in front of guests. I was wrong. Margaret Brooks never cared about my cooking. She cared about control. And for a long time, she got it, quietly, politely, with a smile that made everyone else think she was simply concerned. If you met her once, you'd probably like her. She was the kind of woman who remembered birthdays, sent handwritten thank you notes, and donated to every school fundraiser. She dressed in soft colors, spoke in calm sentences, and always framed her opinions as advice. But advice is just a weapon when you don't allow the other person to say no. I married her only son, Daniel, when I was 28. Daniel was warm, funny, and, this matters, he was tired. Tired in a way that comes from growing up inside someone else's expectations. Margaret called it being sensitive. I called it what it was. A man trained to keep his mother calm. At our wedding reception, Margaret hugged me and whispered, "Welcome to the family. We take care of our own." People heard that and smiled. I heard it and felt the latch click. The first year of marriage was a lesson in invisible rules. Margaret never said, "You must," but she always implied, "You should." You should come for Sunday dinner. You should let me handle the guest list. You should do holidays at my house because it's easier. You should call me first before you make decisions, just so I don't worry. And I'll admit it, at first, I tried. I tried to be flexible. I tried to not take it personally. I told myself Margaret was lonely. I told myself she was adjusting. I told myself I was lucky to have someone so involved. Then I got pregnant. That's when Margaret stopped pretending my boundaries mattered. When I told her we were expecting, her face lit up like a stage spotlight. She clasped my hands, squeezed too hard, and said, "My baby is coming." Not our baby, her baby. I corrected her gently. "Our baby," I said, smiling. Margaret laughed like I'd made a cute joke. "Of course," she replied, "but you'll see what I mean." From that moment, my pregnancy became a public project. She insisted on joining my first ultrasound. When I hesitated, she called Daniel crying. Not loud sobbing, quiet, wounded tears, the kind that make a son feel like a monster. "It's her first grandchild," Daniel told me, eyes pleading. "Can we just let her come?" I said yes, because I didn't want to be the villain in my own story. At the appointment, Margaret sat beside me as if she belonged there. She asked the technician questions I didn't even know to ask, like she was interviewing a candidate. She took photos of the screen without permission. She posted a vague status later. Blessed beyond words. No name, no credit, just ownership. As my belly grew, so did her commentary. "You're carrying low," she'd say, as if it were a moral choice. "You need more protein," she'd instruct, ignoring my nausea. "You look tired," she'd comment in front of friends, then add, "I worry Elena can't handle motherhood." Always framed as worry. Always a subtle stab. I started to push back in small ways. We didn't tell her the name we chose. We didn't let her design the nursery. We didn't agree to her moving in for the first month after the baby arrived. Margaret smiled through every no, but the smile got tighter each time. "You'll understand when you're a mother," she'd say. And then, when I became a mother, she used that against me. Our son Oliver was born on a rainy Tuesday morning. Daniel cried when he held him. I cried too, because I was exhausted and joyful and terrified all at once. Margaret arrived at the hospital within 2 hours. She swept into the room with balloons, a camera, and the kind of energy that made nurses treat her like she was in charge. "Oh, there he is," she cooed, reaching for Oliver before she even looked at me. "Come to Grandma." I expected her to pause, to ask, to wait. She didn't. She lifted my newborn out of my arms like he belonged to her, and for a moment I felt something primal and sharp, an instinct I didn't know I had, flare in my chest. "Margaret," I said, voice quiet but firm, "please ask before taking him." Margaret froze for half a second, then turned the moment into theater. She smiled sweetly at the nurse. "First time moms," she said softly, like I was embarrassing but harmless. The nurse laughed politely. Daniel didn't say a word. That was the moment I understood. If I didn't protect my boundaries, no one else would. At home, the invasion continued. Margaret came by to drop off meals. The meals stayed. She stayed. She sat on my couch and criticized my swaddling, my feeding schedule, my choice of pacifier. "You're holding him too much," she'd warn. "He'll become dependent," she'd say, while literally trying to make him dependent on her. When Oliver cried, she'd swoop in. "I'll take him," she'd announce, as if motherhood were a shift you could clock out of. When I said no, she'd sigh and look at Daniel. "She won't let me help," she'd say in that wounded voice. Daniel would turn to me with that same plea. "Babe, she's just trying." So I tried a new tactic. I stopped arguing in front of Daniel. Instead, I started documenting. Not because I planned revenge, not yet. Because something about Margaret's concern felt strategic, like she was gathering material. I kept a simple notebook in the kitchen drawer. Dates, times, comments, incidents. Margaret said I'm too anxious in front of neighbor. Margaret took Oliver outside without telling me. Margaret refused to give Oliver back for 12 minutes. 12 minutes doesn't sound like much until you're a new mother and your baby is in someone else's arms and you're being treated like you're crazy for wanting him back. The notebook calmed me. It made me feel less alone in my own perception. Then, when Oliver was 3 months old, Margaret invited me to lunch. Just us. Daniel was at work. Oliver was asleep in his carrier. Margaret chose a quiet cafe where people whispered and smiled, where any raised voice would look like a tantrum. She ordered for me without asking. "I thought you'd like the salad," she said, as if my preferences were a guess she'd already solved. Then she slid a folder across the table. "Just something practical," she said, "for emergencies." I opened it and felt my stomach drop. Temporary guardianship paperwork, power of attorney forms, medical authorization. At the top, in bold letters, was a phrase that made my skin go cold. In the event the mother is unable to provide care. Unable. Not dead, not missing. Unable. I looked up slowly. "What is this?" Margaret's expression stayed calm. "It's nothing scary. It's protection. If you get sick, if you have postpartum struggles," she said postpartum struggles like she was already certain I would have them. "I'm fine," I said. Margaret reached across and patted my hand. "Of course you are. I'm just thinking ahead." I didn't sign. Margaret didn't push. She didn't need to. She simply smiled and said, "Take it home. Think about it." I went home and showed Daniel. His face tightened. "Why would Mom?" "Because she wants control," I said. Daniel rubbed his forehead. "She's worried. You've been stressed." Stressed. As if stress wasn't normal when you're healing from birth and sleeping in 90-minute fragments. "That doesn't mean she gets legal rights to our child," I said. Daniel's shoulders sank. "Let's not make this a war." War. Another word used to make women back down. I told Daniel I would not sign anything without a lawyer. He looked shocked, then offended, like I'd implied he was untrustworthy. "It's my mom," he said. "That's why," I replied. 2 days later, Margaret called Daniel crying. That night, Daniel came into the bedroom with the folder in his hands and said, "Mom's upset. She thinks you hate her." I stared at him. "She brought me guardianship papers." "I know," he said quickly, "but she says it's just in case. And honestly, having something in place isn't crazy." The way he said honestly was the way people say it when they're trying to convince themselves. I took a slow breath. "I'll talk to a lawyer," I said. Daniel exhaled in relief, like that was a compromise. Margaret thought she'd won. She hadn't. I found an attorney named Rachel Monroe. She specialized in family law, and she spoke in facts the way some people speak in prayers. She read Margaret's packet once, then again, slower. "This isn't about emergencies," Rachel said finally. "This is about positioning." "Positioning for what?" I asked, though I already felt the answer crawling up my spine. "For a custody challenge," she said. "Not necessarily today, but someday, when you're tired or broke or your marriage is shaky. This paperwork is designed to make you look unable without ever proving it." I swallowed. "Can she even do that?" "People can file for anything," Rachel said. "Winning is another matter. But if she's collecting concerns, she could force you into court and make you spend money defending yourself. That alone can be the goal." I thought of Margaret's camera roll, the close-ups, the angles, the way she narrated my choices. "Okay," I said quietly. "Then what do we do?" Rachel leaned forward. "We do 2 things. We refuse her documents, and we write our own, one that protects you and Oliver, and that makes her regret trying this." Rachel drafted a proper emergency guardianship plan. If both Daniel and I were incapacitated, a guardian could step in. Normal, reasonable. But she also inserted a safeguard she called a mutual consent trigger. Any third party, including a grandparent, who initiated legal action to obtain custody, emergency guardianship, or decision-making power without written consent from both parents would be treated as acting adversarially. In that case, the parents could revoke that third party's access to the child and designate an alternate temporary caregiver, and the document would serve as evidence that the filing was hostile, not cooperative. In plain language, if Margaret tried to take Oliver from me, the attempt itself would automatically put a lock on the door. "You're telling me her own filing could cut her off?" I asked. Rachel nodded. "If your husband signs too, yes." That was the hard part. Daniel loved me. I knew that. But he also loved the version of his mother who didn't exist. Gentle, sacrificial, harmless. He'd been raised to see her tears as proof of love, and her disappointment as proof of his failure. I brought Daniel to Rachel's office. Rachel didn't attack Margaret. She didn't call her manipulative. She didn't insult Daniel's loyalty. She spoke like a professional addressing a risk. "Your mother is asking for authority that parents don't normally grant," she told Daniel. "If she truly wanted emergency planning, she'd accept a standard document. The fact that she's pushing language like unable to provide care suggests she wants leverage." Daniel's face tightened. "She's just worried," he murmured. Rachel slid the revised plan toward him. "Then this protects you too," she said. "It ensures no one, your mother included, can create chaos without both parents agreeing." Daniel stared at the signature line for a long time. "I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I waited." Finally, he signed. His hand moved like a man signing peace, not realizing it was also a shield. We sent the revised document to Margaret's attorney. Margaret asked for a meeting. We met at her house on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of afternoon she used to control with roast chicken and soft music and the smell of clean linen. Her living room was arranged like a magazine spread. Nothing out of place, nothing that suggested a real person ever lived there. Margaret smiled warmly when we arrived. She hugged Daniel first, held him too long, then turned to me and kissed the air near my cheek. "I'm so glad we're being responsible," she said, taking the folder from my hands. Her eyes skimmed the first page, then the second. She nodded as if she understood, as if she'd anticipated it. She didn't ask questions. She didn't read carefully. That should have scared me, but it didn't. It confirmed what Rachel had said. Margaret wanted signatures, not clarity. She signed. So did her lawyer. Margaret poured tea afterward and chatted like everything was settled, like she'd just secured her place at the center of our family forever. I smiled and drank my tea, and felt something in me settle into a quiet, steady calm. Because now the trap existed, and she didn't know she'd stepped into it. For nearly a year after that, Margaret behaved. She praised my parenting in public. She offered help without grabbing. She texted polite questions instead of arriving unannounced. If you asked Daniel, he would have said everything had improved. But I noticed the small things. The way she asked Daniel how I was coping when I was 2 feet away. The way she suggested I rest while she took Oliver into another room. The way she said, "He's so calm with me," like calm was a ranking system and she was winning. I kept my notebook. And then Daniel lost his job. It wasn't dramatic. A corporate restructure. A meeting on a Tuesday, a box on a Friday. Suddenly, our savings had an end date. Suddenly, our house felt smaller. Stress entered our marriage like a third person. Daniel became quieter, more defensive. I became more vigilant. Oliver, sensing tension, became clingier. Margaret sensed it too. She showed up with groceries and soft sympathy. "My poor boy," she said to Daniel, "you must be exhausted." Then she looked at me and said, "You too, Elena. Motherhood is so hard when you're fragile. Fragile. I wasn't fragile. I was tired. There's a difference. Margaret offered the same solution every controlling person offers when they smell weakness. Move closer to me. Stay here, she suggested, just until things stabilize. I can help with Oliver. I can cook. You'll save money. Daniel's eyes flickered with relief. That might actually... No, I said calmly. Margaret's smile froze. Elena, don't be proud. It's not pride, I replied. It's boundaries. Margaret's voice softened into that familiar concern. Boundaries are wonderful, dear, but children need stability. Daniel needs support. You need rest. The way she said rest sounded like surrender. Daniel argued with me that night. I'm drowning, he said, and you're turning down help because you don't like my mom? I don't dislike her, I said. I don't trust her. Daniel's eyes flashed. You're paranoid. There it was, the word Margaret had been polishing for years, now in my husband's mouth. I didn't scream back. I didn't retaliate. I simply said, if we move in, it's temporary, and we keep our legal plan as it is, and Oliver is never alone with her. Daniel stared at me as if I'd suggested a crime. Never alone? She tried to put guardianship papers in front of me, I said. This is not a normal relationship. Daniel looked away. You're making her sound like a villain. She's not a villain, I said. She's worse. She's believable. We didn't move in, but the fight left a crack, and Margaret saw the crack. She started calling Daniel more often, inviting him over to talk, offering him advice about how to handle me. She framed it as helping our marriage while quietly positioning herself as a safer option. Oliver began spending more time with her because Daniel, seeking relief, brought him there. Then, one evening, Oliver came home and said a sentence that made the room tilt. Grandma says Mommy gets mad a lot, he said, munching crackers like he was sharing trivia. He was 3 years old. He said it with no malice, only repetition. My hands went cold. Did Grandma say that? Oliver nodded. She said, Daddy is happier when you're quiet. I stared at my son and felt a line inside me harden into steel. Margaret wasn't just trying to control me. She was teaching my child to fear me, to associate my voice with danger and her voice with safety. That isn't love. That is grooming. I told Daniel what Oliver said. Daniel frowned. He probably misunderstood. He didn't, I said. Daniel rubbed his temples. Mom says things. She doesn't mean harm. If she teaches our son to distrust his mother, that is harm, I replied. Daniel didn't answer. His silence felt like a door closing. A month later, Oliver fell at Margaret's house. A minor fall. A rug. A forehead cut. 10 minutes of crying. Then snacks and cartoons. Margaret didn't call me. She called Daniel. Daniel called me from her kitchen. He's fine, he said quickly. Mom put a bandage on. I drove over anyway. When I walked in, Margaret was sitting with Oliver on her lap. Calm, composed, like a rescuer. She looked up at me with a gentle smile. See, she said softly, these things happen. Then I saw her phone on the counter, open to the camera roll. Close-up photos of the cut. Different angles, different lighting, timestamps, evidence. My throat tightened. I took Oliver from her lap. "We're going to urgent care," I said. Margaret's smile tightened. "That's unnecessary. You're overreacting." Overreacting. Emotional. Fragile. I didn't respond. At urgent care, the doctor cleaned the cut and applied a small adhesive strip. No stitches, no concerns. Before we left, I asked the physician to document. Injury consistent with minor fall, no signs of neglect. I didn't tell Margaret I did that. I told Rachel. Rachel's voice turned crisp. "She's preparing to escalate," she said. "Now we prepare to finish it." 2 weeks later, a process server knocked on my door. He handed me papers. Margaret Brooks was filing for emergency guardianship and temporary custody. The reason? Concern for the child's safety due to the mother's instability. Instability. A single word designed to stain everything. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I called Rachel and said, "It's happening." Rachel replied, "Good. Now we end it." Daniel came home that night shaking. "I didn't know," he said. "I swear I didn't know she'd do this." I looked at him, calm. "You didn't know because you kept choosing not to see." He flinched. Then he said something that hurt more than the court papers. "But you have been intense lately." Intense. Another label. Another excuse. Margaret's narrative had already entered our marriage. Rachel filed our response within hours. She attached the urgent care note. She attached my documentation logs. She included texts where Margaret implied I was fragile. She requested the court recognize Margaret's filing as hostile third-party action. Then she invoked the mutual consent trigger. The hearing was set fast. Margaret arrived dressed in soft cream, hair perfect, face wounded. She looked like every concerned grandmother stereotype, exactly the image she'd cultivated. She held a folder of photos. She presented them like proof. Oliver's cut, Oliver's scraped knee from months earlier, a tantrum snapshot in a grocery store. Normal childhood moments framed as warning signs. When the judge asked if Margaret notified the mother promptly after the injury, Margaret said, "Daniel handled it." The judge looked at Daniel. "Did you inform the mother immediately?" Daniel swallowed. "Not immediately," he admitted. "My mother called me first." The judge's eyes narrowed. He turned to Margaret. "Why did you call the father before the mother?" Margaret smiled gently. "Daniel is easier to reach, and I didn't want Elena to overreact." Overreact. Even in court, she couldn't resist painting me as unstable. Then the judge asked the question Rachel had been waiting for. Did both parents consent to this action? Margaret's lawyer began to speak, but the judge held up a hand. "I'm asking about consent." Daniel stared at his hands. His voice came out quiet. "I didn't consent," he said. "I didn't know she filed until after." Margaret's face tightened for a fraction of a second. A slip, a crack in the mask. Rachel stood. "Your Honor, the parents have a designation document on file. It includes a clause addressing hostile third-party filings. We ask the court to recognize it and dismiss this petition." The clerk accepted the document. The judge read. Margaret shifted in her seat. The judge looked up. "Ms. Brooks, You signed this designation? Margaret's voice was soft. Yes, but I was told it was routine. The judge's tone was calm but firm. It is routine. Routine for parents to protect themselves from third-party interference. Margaret's lawyer tried to pivot. Your Honor, the child was injured. The judge tapped the urgent care note. The physician notes no evidence of neglect. Minor fall, treated appropriately. Then the judge turned back to Margaret. You photographed the injury. You filed for emergency custody without consent. You did not inform the mother promptly. This appears less like protection and more like an attempt to remove a parent. Margaret's mouth opened, then closed. The petition was dismissed. But the judge didn't stop there. He issued a warning. Future filings without new, credible evidence would be treated as harassment. Rachel requested a temporary order for supervised contact due to attempted interference. The judge granted it. Margaret's face went pale. Outside the courtroom, she tried to reach Daniel. Danny, she whispered, tears finally spilling. I did this for you. Daniel stepped back. No, he said, voice breaking. You did it for you. Margaret looked at me then, really looked at me, with something like hatred behind the concern. And for the first time, she dropped the act. This isn't over, she hissed, low enough that no one else could hear. I didn't flinch. It is, I said quietly, because now you're on record. The months after court were quieter, but not harmless. Margaret tried to rewrite the outcome with gossip, telling relatives I turned Daniel against her, implying judges get things wrong, suggesting I was unstable. But she couldn't erase the paperwork, and everyone who mattered knew it. Daniel finally saw what I'd been living with: guilt used as a leash, help offered with hooks, and my boundaries treated like crimes. We had hard conversations. We tried counseling. We set rules. Some days it worked, but the damage was already inside the marriage. Peace required distance, and distance changed everything. We separated quietly. No screaming, no public war, just a slow, sober decision to co-parent without Margaret's shadow in our home. Oliver adjusted faster than anyone. Children always do when adults stop making their world unstable. He stopped repeating Margaret's lines. He stopped flinching when I raised my voice to call him for dinner. He started sleeping through the night. Peace was not loud. It was boring, and boring was beautiful. Margaret still sent birthday cards. Sometimes she mailed gifts through relatives. I kept everything sealed in a box, not out of spite, out of safety. Because some people use sentiment the way they use paperwork, as a lever. Every once in a while, I would find myself thinking about that cafe. The salad I didn't choose. The folder sliding across the table like a casual suggestion. The calm smile that assumed my compliance. Margaret believed I was the kind of woman who would sign anything to avoid being called difficult. And maybe once I was. But motherhood changes your bones. When it comes to your child, you stop caring whether people like you. You start caring whether your child is safe. Margaret's plan was simple. Paint me unstable, position herself as the solution, and use legal language as a weapon. My plan was quieter. Document, prepare, and make sure every move she made created a paper trail she couldn't smile away. In the end, she didn't lose because I was louder. She lost because she was careless. She signed the document that turned her ambition into evidence. She filed the petition that triggered the clause that boxed her out. And she showed the court exactly who she was. Not a grandmother worried about a child, but a woman willing to remove a mother to satisfy her own need for control. That's the part people rarely understand. The revenge wasn't humiliation. The revenge was exposure in the only place her charm couldn't control: legal record. She tried to take my child. Instead, she lost her influence, her access, and the illusion that she was untouchable. And I never had to scream. I just stopped being easy.